In the forgotten reaches of a kingdom, where the wind howled songs of bygone eras through mountain crevices, Grandfather Ilara and his two orphaned grandsons, Kyle and Finn, were banished. The cruel Lord Valerius, with a sneer, cast them out of the village, condemning them to an existence in the ruins of an ancient castle perched atop a windy grey hill. The cold, moss-covered stones of the decaying fortress seemed to whisper tales of lost glories, while the echo of their own footsteps vanished in the empty halls. Grandfather Ilara, with calloused hands and a heavy heart, yet a resilient soul, had promised his late wife he would care for the boys. The biting cold was a constant enemy, hunger a persistent shadow, and the scorn of the villagers, who saw them as fools for clinging to a pile of rubble, was a heavy burden. Day after day, the boys, small but determined, helped carry stones and firewood, while their grandfather, with the wisdom of ancient legends he knew about that place, tried to transform the uninhabitable into a home. They improvised fires, cleaned the moss from the walls, and patched the leaking roof, battling relentless nature. It was during one of these efforts, while trying to reinforce a crumbling wall that led to the subsoil, that Kale's pickaxe struck something solid and hollow. Not stone, but ancient wood, hidden beneath the damp earth. The metallic clang of Kyle's pickaxe against something that was not stone reverberated through the silent ruins, a sharp echo that broke the melancholy of the wind. It wasn't the dull thud of rock, nor the hollow crack of loose earth, but a denser, more resonant sound, like ancient compacted wood. Grandfather Ilara, who was patching a crack in the ceiling with moss and improvised clay, stopped, his keen gaze immediately fixed on where Kyle was working. Finn, who was stacking firewood near the dying fire, dropped his burden and ran over, childish curiosity alight in his eyes. "What was that, Kale?" The grandfather's voice, though weary, carried a note of alarm. Kale, his heart pounding, pointed to the hole his tool had opened. "It sounds like wood, Grandfather, right here under the ground." With calloused hands, Grandfather Ilara knelt, clearing away the damp earth and small stones Kyle had dislodged. Slowly, a dark, smooth surface began to reveal itself. It wasn't a tree trunk, nor a fallen beam. It was a plank, or perhaps a panel, of dark, heavy wood, embedded in the crumbling wall that led to the subsoil. The wood appeared to have been treated, aged by time, yet incredibly resistant. There was something deliberate in its placement, something that suggested it was no accident. "Careful, boys," the grandfather whispered, more to himself than to them as he examined the discovery. Tension hung in the air, a mix of hope and apprehension. In that forgotten place, anything out of the ordinary could be both a blessing and a curse. He ran his fingers over the surface, feeling the grooves of ancient craftsmanship almost imperceptible beneath centuries of dirt. This isn't natural. It's a door or a hidden panel. With the boys' help, they began to remove more earth and rubble around the wooden structure. With each piece of debris cleared away, the magnitude of the discovery became clearer. It was, in fact, a rectangular panel, perfectly fitted into the rock, so well disguised that it had gone unnoticed for countless generations. No crack, no visible handle. It was as if the rock had swallowed the wood and hidden it. "How do we open it, Grandfather?" Finn asked, his voice full of expectation. Grandfather Ilara examined every inch of the panel. His experienced eyes, which had seen many things throughout his life, searched for a mechanism, a clue. Finally, in the lower right corner, almost imperceptible, he noticed a small protrusion, a bump that seemed to be the head of a corroded metal rivet. With the tip of Kyle's pickaxe, he prodded the protrusion. With an almost inaudible creak, the rivet yielded slightly, and the panel moved, revealing a thin crack. A smell of damp earth, mold, and something older, Something reminiscent of rusted metal and centuries of stagnant air escaped from the crack. The air was heavy, almost palpable. Kyle and Finn instinctively recoiled, but Grandfather Ilara, with a glint of determination in his eyes, pushed the pickaxe into the crack and leveraged it open. With a prolonged, agonizing groan, the ancient wood gave way. The panel, which was actually a secret door, swung inward, revealing absolute darkness. There was no light, just a deep void that seemed to swallow sound. The cold emanating from the opening was more intense than the wind outside, a cold that seemed to come from a place where time had stopped. "Bring a torch," Grandfather Ilara ordered, his voice hoarse with excitement and caution. Finn ran to the fire, grabbing a flaming branch. The flickering torchlight danced in the darkness, revealing a narrow, descending tunnel, carved into the very rock. The walls were rough, but there were signs they had been worked, perhaps to conceal the passage. The air was dense, and with each breath, the scent of centuries of oblivion filled their lungs. "Shall we go, Grandfather?" Kyle asked, his voice low, but his eyes gleaming with newfound courage. Grandfather Ilara hesitated for a moment. Prudence dictated they stay away from ancient mysteries. But hunger, cold, and the desperation of their situation cried louder. What if this was the answer to their prayers? What if it was salvation for his grandsons? "Yes," he finally said, his voice firm, but with great care. "Stay close to me." With Grandfather Ilara leading the way, holding the torch, they descended into the tunnel. The steps were uneven and damp, slippery in places. With each step, the feeling of entering a place untouched by time intensified. The tunnel wound downwards, the darkness swallowing the torchlight a few feet away. The sound of their own footsteps was muffled by the heavy air, and the silence was so profound it seemed to have weight. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel opened into a small, circular chamber. The torch revealed rough stone walls, but the floor was packed earth. In the center of the chamber, shrouded in cobwebs and a thick layer of dust, it stood, a massive object made of dark, heavy iron, with intricate reliefs corroded by time. It wasn't an ordinary chest. It was a safe, a secret, sealed, imposing safe, with a robust and complex locking mechanism that seemed to defy any attempt to open it. Grandfather Ilara's heart pounded. There were no visible gold coins, no glittering jewels, just the safe, a silent promise of a secret kept for ages. The tension was almost unbearable. They had found something of immense significance, but the true treasure, or danger, was still sealed within that iron fortress. The future of the baby, still unknown to them, perhaps depended on what lay inside. The flickering torch, held in Grandfather Ilara's trembling hand, cast dancing shadows over the massive object in the center of the chamber. It wasn't just a safe, it was a miniature fortress, a monument to time's persistence. The dark, heavy iron, with its intricate, corroded reliefs, seemed to defy any attempt to open it, a silent guardian of forgotten secrets. Kyle and Finn, wide-eyed, barely dared to breathe, the tension of the discovery hanging heavily in the stagnant air. Grandfather Ilara knelt, his calloused hands tracing the cold, rough surface of the metal. He felt the grooves of the designs, once perhaps brilliant, now obscured by centuries of dust and rust. There was no visible lock, no obvious handle, just an impenetrable mass of iron, sealed against the world. Despair, a familiar shadow, threatened to creep into his heart. They had found something, yes, but something useless if they couldn't access its contents. The hunger and cold outside seemed to mock their discovery. Is it a metal box, Grandfather?" Finn asked, his voice an almost inaudible whisper. "It's a safe, my little one," Grandfather replied, his voice hoarse. "An ancient safe, and it seems it doesn't want to reveal its secrets easily." He ran his fingers over one of the reliefs, a complex design that appeared to be a forgotten crest or symbol. Corrosion had eaten away part of the metal, but the shape was still discernible. It was a rampant lion, holding a key. A key. Grandfather Ilara felt a shiver. It wasn't just an adornment, it was a clue. "Look here, boys," he pointed to the symbol. "The lion and the key. This isn't just a drawing, it's a message." With the torch closer, he examined the lion. Grandfather's experienced eyes, trained to observe the tiniest details of nature and ruins, noticed a subtle difference in the metal's texture right in the center of the lion's body. It wasn't corrosion. It was a small indentation, almost imperceptible, that seemed to have been made for a purpose. "Kale, your pickaxe," he requested. "Very carefully. Try to fit the tip in here." Kyle, with steady hands despite the excitement, obeyed. The pickaxe tip barely fit into the small crevice. Grandfather Ilara held the torch, its light flickering, as Kale applied gentle, steady pressure. An almost imperceptible creak echoed in the chamber, and the small indentation yielded a millimeter, revealing a tiny gap. "Keep going, Kale. Carefully." Grandfather encouraged, his heart pounding. Kyle pushed again. This time a more audible click broke the silence. The indentation, which was actually a disguised button, sank a little further, and a metallic sound, like ancient gears moving, reverberated from inside the safe. A smell of rancid oil and oxidized metal escaped from the newly opened gap. "It worked, Grandfather. It worked," Finn exclaimed, jumping with joy. Grandfather Ilara didn't reply, his eyes fixed on the safe. The button had released something. He examined the surface again, following the logic of the mechanism. On the opposite side of the lion, where the crest's key pointed, there was a small lever previously camouflaged by rust and dirt, now slightly protruding. "Here," he said, pointing. The lion's key pointed to this. It's the lever. With a combined effort, the three positioned themselves. Grandfather Ilara held the lever, while Kale and Finn, with their small hands, helped push. With a prolonged, agonizing groan, like the lament of a sleeping giant, the lever gave way. The safe's internal mechanism turned with a heavy, slow sound, and then with a final resonant clunk. The safe's front door, which was a single piece, began to move. Slowly, millimeter by millimeter, the iron door opened, revealing the interior darkness. Grandfather Ilara's torch trembled, its light dancing into the opening, and then a gleam. A warm, golden gleam, which seemed to absorb and reflect the torchlight in a way nothing else in those ruins ever had. The chamber was flooded with a soft radiance, which seemed to emanate from the safe itself. Inside, there were no glittering jewels, no ancient scrolls, no legendary weapons. There was gold, piles and piles of gold coins, stacked in uneven columns, some spilled, forming a golden carpet at the bottom of the safe. They were ancient coins, some with unknown crests, others with effigies of forgotten kings, but all undeniably pure gold. Grandfather Ilara felt a lump in his throat. Kyle and Finn let out a collective gasp of awe, wide-eyed, unable to process the sight. The silence of the chamber was broken only by the crackle of the torch and the muffled sound of their own breaths. That gold. It was more than they could dream of. It was the answer to their prayers, the salvation for their desolate lives. The cold, the hunger, the scorn of the villagers, everything seemed to diminish before that treasure. Grandfather Ilara reached out a trembling hand and picked up a coin. It was heavy, cold to the touch, but laden with a promise of warmth and security. He knew at that moment that it wasn't just Kale and Finn's future that was being rewritten there. In some mysterious way he couldn't comprehend, that gold would be the foundation of a distant future, a future that would one day save a pregnant widow and her baby, ensuring that life and hope would prevail in the forgotten mountains. Destiny, at times, wove its plots more intricately than any ancient legend. They had found the treasure. Now the true journey began. The golden gleam, which had once been merely a promise, now filled the chamber, dancing on the rough stone walls and the dirty, awestruck faces of the three. It was not a dream, nor a mirage. It was gold, piles upon piles, a treasure that defied comprehension, a sea of ancient coins that seemed to have been poured there by invisible hands. Guarded by centuries of silence, Grandfather Ilara, with the coin still in his trembling hand, felt the weight of that precious metal, but also the weight of a colossal responsibility. This was not just a treasure, it was a portal to a future that, until then, had seemed impossible. The hunger, the cold, the humiliation, everything that had driven them to that point, now seemed insignificant before the magnitude of the discovery. Kyle and Finn, wide-eyed, barely dared to touch it. Their small worlds, once defined by scarcity and daily struggle, were suddenly flooded with a wealth they couldn't even name. For them, it was a magical sparkle, a mountain of golden toys. For Grandfather, it was salvation. Is it real, Grandfather?" Finn asked. His voice a mere whisper, as if he feared a louder sound might make it all disappear. Grandfather Ilara simply nodded, a lump in his throat preventing words. He picked up another coin, then another, feeling the cold texture and the comforting weight. Each one was a promise, a tangible piece of hope. But with the euphoria came caution. A treasure like that could not be revealed lightly. It was a blessing, yes, but also a potential curse if it fell into the wrong hands. "Yes, my little ones," he finally managed to say, his voice hoarse with emotion. "It's real, and it's more than enough for us, more than enough to rewrite our destiny." But how? The question hung in the stagnant air. How to transport such wealth? How to convert it into bread, into shelter, into dignity, without arousing the greed and envy of the villagers who already scorned them? That gold, though a solution to hunger, was also a monumental challenge. Grandfather Ilara examined the safe again. The door was open, revealing the depth of the wealth. He knew they couldn't take it all at once. It would be impossible and dangerous. The weight of a few hundred coins would already be a considerable burden for the three of them. "We need to be smart, boys," he instructed, his voice now firmer, his mind already formulating a plan. "This gold is our secret. No one, absolutely no one, can know about it. Do you understand?" Kale and Finn nodded solemnly, the gravity in Grandfather's words penetrating their childish excitement. They had learned early in life the value of secrecy and discretion. "We'll take just a few," Grandfather continued, picking up a small leather pouch he usually used to collect roots and herbs. "Enough to start, to buy food, perhaps a horse and a cart. And then we'll come back, and we'll come back again, until we have enough to rebuild our lives far from here if necessary." He filled the pouch with a generous handful of coins, the metallic, heavy sound echoing in the chamber. The weight of the pouch was surprising. He tied it securely and hid it beneath his worn tunic. "Now, we need to close this," he said, pointing to the safe. The mechanism that had sealed it for centuries now seemed simple to operate. With a combined effort, they pushed the iron door back into its original position. The final heavy clunk resonated, sealing the treasure once again in darkness, hiding the golden gleam, but not its promise. The tunnel back seemed longer, steeper, the air denser. Grandfather Ilara felt the weight of the pouch of coins against his body, a weight that was both physical and emotional. Each step was a mix of exhaustion and renewed energy, driven by hope. When they finally emerged from the tunnel, the cold mountain air felt sharper, but the fire, now almost extinguished, seemed like a beacon of warmth and security. The night was far advanced, and the silence of the mountains was profound, broken only by the whispering wind. They resealed the secret door with the pickaxe, in camouflaging it as much as possible with earth and debris. The entrance to the treasure chamber needed to be a secret, guarded with their very lives. Lying near the fire, under the starry sky, Grandfather Ilara embraced Kale and Finn. The cold still bit, hunger still gnawed, but now there was an abyssal difference. There was hope, there was a plan, there was gold. He looked at the stars, thinking of the future. It wasn't just his grandson's future that was in his hands. A silent voice in his heart, a deep intuition, whispered of a greater destiny, a purpose that transcended the present. That gold, he felt, was the seed of something grand, something that one day, in a distant time and by means he could not foresee, would save a pregnant widow and her baby. The connection was tenuous, almost mystical, but undeniable. The journey back to the cabin, under the cloak of darkness, would be the first step of a new life. The weight of the pouch of coins was a constant reminder of the revolution that had occurred. They had found more than a treasure, they had found a new beginning. But with it came new dangers, new challenges, and the need for a cunning they had never needed before. The game had changed, and the stakes were the future. The journey back to the cabin was a silent ordeal, each step echoing not only on the frozen ground, but also in Grandfather Ilara's soul. The weight of the pouch of coins beneath his tunic was a constant reminder of the revolution that had occurred, a burden that was both physical and emotional. The mountain cold felt sharper, but the fire, now almost extinguished, seemed like a beacon of warmth and security, a distant mirage amidst the oppressive darkness. When they finally lay down near the fire, under the starry sky, Grandfather Ilara embraced Kale and Finn. The cold still bit, hunger still gnawed, but now there was an abyssal difference. There was hope. There was a plan. There was gold. He looked at the stars, thinking of the future. It wasn't just his grandson's future that was in his hands. A silent voice in his heart, a deep intuition, whispered of a greater destiny, a purpose that transcended the present. That gold, he felt, was the seed of something grand, something that one day, in a distant time and by means he could not foresee, would save a pregnant widow and her baby. The connection was tenuous, almost mystical, but undeniable. The first rays of sun barely peeked over the peaks when Grandfather Ilara awoke, the pouch of coins still firmly clutched to his chest. The golden gleam of the previous night seemed a distant dream, replaced by the harsh reality of morning light and the weight of responsibility. Kyle and Finn slept soundly, their childish faces finally serene, free from the worry that haunted them. Grandfather watched them, and a wave of determination washed over him. For them, he would do whatever it took. The first task was the most delicate, how to use the gold without raising suspicion. The nearest village was a nest of gossip and distrust, where any change in fortune for the despised would be noticed and questioned. A gold coin, however small, was a fortune to those villagers. Grandfather Ilara knew he couldn't simply appear with it. He spent the entire morning thinking, while Kyle and Finn, still marveling at the discovery, whispered about what they would buy. "A whole loaf of bread, Grandfather, and meat," Kyle exclaimed. "And a wooden toy," Finn added, his eyes shining. Grandfather smiled sadly. Their innocence was a balm, but also a reminder of the fragility of their new secret. "We need to be clever, my little ones," he said, his voice grave. "We can't go to the village with this. They would ask us where it came from, and we can't tell the truth. If they know, all will be lost." The idea of traveling to a larger, more distant city seemed the only option. There, strangers were common, and a gold coin might not raise so many eyebrows. But such a journey required resources, food for the trip, better clothes so they wouldn't look like beggars, and perhaps even a means of transport. As on foot, it would take days. It was a cruel paradox. They had gold, but couldn't use it to get what they needed to use it. Grandfather Ilara decided he would need a gradual approach. He took one of the gold coins from the pouch, one that seemed more worn, less flashy. He examined it under the dim light of the cabin. It was heavy, cold, and bore the image of a forgotten king. He needed to exchange it for smaller coins, copper or silver, that could be used in the village without causing a stir. But who would make such an exchange without questioning the origin? There was an old merchant, a reclusive man who lived on the outskirts of the village, known for his discretion and for not asking too many questions, as long as the price was fair. He was a man of few words and many secrets, a weak link in the village's chain of gossip. Perhaps he was the key. "Kyle," grandfather said, calling his eldest grandson, "you are a good observer. Do you remember old Elias, the merchant who lives by the stream?" Kyle nodded. "Yes, grandfather. He always gives us a piece of fruit when we pass by. He is a different man. He doesn't care about others' lives, only his business. I will go to him. But I need you two to stay here and not say a word to anyone about what we found. Not even a whisper. This is our secret. It is our life." The boys promised, their faces serious. They understood the importance. Grandfather Ilara hid the gold coin in a small cloth pouch and tied it firmly to his belt under his tunic. His heart pounded in his chest, a mix of fear and excitement. It was the first time he had ventured into the village with something of value, and the risk was immense. As he walked along the winding path, Grandfather Ilara felt the invisible eyes of the mountain upon him. Every shadow seemed to harbor an observer, every rustle of leaves a spy. Paranoia was a constant companion. He knew that life in the mountains was hard, and envy was a contagious disease. If news of the treasure spread, they would be hunted, dispossessed, perhaps even killed. Old Elias's cabin was a tangle of wood and moss, hidden among the trees. A thin smoke rose from the chimney, indicating the merchant was home. Grandfather Ilara took a deep breath, trying to calm the nervousness that gnawed at him. He knocked on the door, a muffled sound that seemed too loud in the silence of the forest. The door creaked, and Elias's wrinkled face appeared in the crack, his small, shrewd eyes examining Grandfather Ilara from head to toe. "Ilara," he growled, his voice hoarse. "What brings you here? I don't recall you having anything to trade." "I have something, Elias," Grandfather replied, his voice trying to sound casual, but the tension was palpable. "Something that might be of interest to you." Elias opened the door a little wider, the smell of dried herbs and old tobacco escaping from the cabin. His eyes fixed on Grandfather Ilara, searching for any sign of lies or tricks. Grandfather Ilara knew this was the moment of truth. The future of Kyle, Finn, and somehow that of a pregnant widow and her baby depended on this encounter. He extended his hand, revealing the gold coin. The golden gleam, even in the dim light of the cabin, was unmistakable. Elias's eyes widened slightly, a rare emotion on his impassive face. The game had begun. Elias's small, shrewd eyes, previously merely curious, now widened slightly, an emotion that rarely adorned his wrinkled face. The gold coin, heavy and cold in Grandfather Ilara's outstretched palm, caught the scant light filtering through the half-open door, radiating a gleam that seemed to defy the cabin's gloom. It was a gleam of promise, but also of danger. The silence that followed was denser than the mountain fog, filled only by the distant crackle of Elias's fire and the accelerated beat of Grandfather Ilara's heart. Elias took the coin with slow, hesitant fingers, as if fearing to burn himself. He turned it over and over, his eyes examining every detail: the effigy of the forgotten king, the marks of wear, the unmistakable weight. The merchant, known for his impassivity, now showed a glimpse of astonishment. Where did you get this, Ilara?" His hoarse voice was a whisper, almost inaudible. but laden with a curiosity that transcended mere commercial transaction. Grandfather Ilara had rehearsed this moment in his mind hundreds of times. "It's an inheritance, Elias," he replied, his voice firmer than he expected. "An old family piece I finally decided to use. Times are hard, as you know." It was a half-truth, a convenient lie that didn't completely stray from the reality of the mountain and its secrets. He knew Elias wouldn't fully believe him, but the merchant was a man of business, not an inquisitor. Elias snorted, a sound that could be disbelief or acceptance. He wasn't foolish. He knew that gold inheritances didn't just appear out of nowhere in the hands of a man living on the fringes of subsistence, but he also knew that asking too many questions could drive away a valuable client. And gold was an irresistible temptation. "Inheritance, you say?" Elias repeated, a thin, almost imperceptible smile appearing on his lips. "A very shiny inheritance." He pondered, weighing the coin in his hand. "What do you want for it, Ilara?" "I need smaller coins," Grandfather Ilara replied, holding his gaze steady. "Copper, silver, enough to buy provisions, perhaps some tools, whatever is fair." The word fair hung in the air, a silent challenge. Elias was known for his discretion, but also for his shrewdness in business. He wouldn't give a good price easily. The merchant scratched his sparse beard, his eyes fixed on the coin. "A gold coin is worth a lot, Ilara, much more than you can spend in the village without causing a stir. No one here has enough copper or silver to exchange for a piece like this, except me, and I take a risk by doing this." He paused dramatically, his eyes blinking. "People talk. If they know you have gold and that I exchanged it, we'll both have problems." "That's why I came to you, Elias," Grandfather Ilara retorted, his voice gaining a tone of controlled urgency. "Your discretion is legendary, and I need your help. I don't want to attract attention, just enough to survive for my grandsons, and I promise this will be our secret, just between us." Really, he knew he was playing on Elias's reputation, on his pride in being the man who didn't ask questions, the shadowy link of mountain trade. Elias considered the words, his eyes sweeping over Grandfather Ilara, assessing the sincerity and desperation behind the calm facade. He knew Ilara was not a trickster, but the coin's origin still intrigued him. However, the gleam of the gold was stronger than curiosity. "I can do it," Elias finally said, his voice returning to its usual hoarse tone. "But it won't be an easy exchange. I'll have to travel to the city to trade this gold for something I can sell. That will cost me time and effort." He made an offer, a value that was considerable for Ilara's immediate needs, but which Grandfather knew to be a fraction of the coin's real worth. Grandfather Ilara hesitated. He knew he was being exploited, but he had no choice. His grandson's safety depended on it. "I accept," he said, his voice a little lower. "But I need a part now for the most urgent needs, the rest when you return from the city." Elias nodded, satisfied with the agreement. He turned and, from a chest hidden beneath the packed earth floor, took out a small leather pouch. From inside, he poured a handful of copper coins and a few silver ones, which clinked softly on the improvised table. It was enough to buy bread, meat, perhaps even a new blanket and some seeds for the next season. Grandfather Ilara took the coins, feeling the familiar weight of copper and silver, a stark contrast to the gold he had just handed over. The transaction was done. "No one needs to know, Ilara," Elias warned, his eyes fixed. "No one, not even your grandsons, should speak of it. The mountains have ears, and envy is a hungry predator." "I know, Elias," Grandfather Ilara replied, the pouch of coins now firmly tied to his belt. "This secret will die with me." He bid farewell, leaving the merchant's cabin with a mix of relief and a renewed wave of paranoia. The first step had been taken, but the path ahead was long and treacherous. The journey back to the cabin was quicker, driven by adrenaline and the lightness of the coin pouch. The sun was already high and the birds sang, but Grandfather Ilara barely noticed them. His thoughts were on Kale and Finn, and the promise of a future that the gold could bring, but also on the silent voice in his heart, the mystical intuition about the pregnant widow and her baby. That gold was not just for them. It was for something greater, something he still didn't fully comprehend. Upon reaching the cabin, Kyle and Finn ran to meet him, their eyes full of anxiety. Grandfather Ilara smiled, a genuine smile he hadn't felt in a long time. "I did it, my little ones," he said, showing them the pouch of coins. "We have enough to eat and to start planning." The boys' eyes shone with pure, uninhibited joy. "Bread and meat!" Kyle exclaimed, while Finn jumped with excitement. "Yes, my children, bread, meat, and perhaps even a wooden toy for Finn," Grandfather Ilara confirmed, stroking each of their heads. "But remember, this is our secret. No one can know, not a word, not a whisper. Do you understand?" The boys nodded vigorously, the seriousness on their childish faces a testament to their understanding. They had learned the lesson of discretion and danger. Grandfather Ilara sat with them, the coins clinking softly on his belt. The first step had been a success, but the true journey was just beginning. They would need more than bread and meat. They would need a plan to use the rest of the gold, to build a life, to ensure the hidden treasure remained a secret, and to, somehow, fulfill the mystical destiny Grandfather Ilara felt in his heart, a destiny that would one day save a pregnant widow and her baby. The mountain, with its secrets and dangers, still watched them, but now they had a chance, a golden chance. The smell of fresh bread and roasted meat filled the small cabin, an aroma that had long been only a distant memory. Kyle and Finn, their faces lit by a childish, uninhibited joy, devoured the meal with a voracity that broke Grandfather Ilara's heart. Each bite was a silent testament to the success of that first dangerous transaction. Grandfather watched them, a lump in his throat, feeling the weight of the now lighter coin pouch on his belt, but the burden of the secret, that had grown heavier. The mountain outside seemed to breathe with a new intensity. Every whisper of the wind through the trees, every distant crackle in the forest, was amplified by the paranoia that now nested in Grandfather Ilara's chest. Elias had been clear. The mountains had ears, and envy was a hungry predator. That gold, which promised salvation, was also a magnet for misfortune if its secret were revealed. As the boys slept soundly, their bellies full for the first time in a long while, Grandfather Ilara sat by the dying fire, the glow of the embers dancing in his tired eyes. He took out the coin pouch, now containing only copper and silver, and spread them across his palm. It wasn't much, but it was enough for a few weeks, perhaps a month if they were careful. But what then? He couldn't simply keep exchanging gold coins one by one with Elias. The merchant, however discreet, would eventually raise suspicions, and the risk of being robbed or worse would become unsustainable. The silent voice in his heart, that mystical intuition that had guided him to the treasure, now spoke with greater clarity. That gold was not just for Kale and Finn's immediate survival. It was for something greater, something that would transcend poverty and hunger. It was for the future of a baby, for the hope of a pregnant widow he had never met, but whose existence he felt with an unwavering certainty. The abandoned mud castle, the gold coins beneath the earth. It all fit into a design he barely understood, but felt a responsibility to fulfill. He needed a plan that not only ensured his grandson's safety, but also preserved the treasure for its true purpose. It couldn't just be about buying food. It needed to be about building something that could be passed down, something that wouldn't raise red flags in the isolated mountain community. His eyes scanned the humble cabin, the cracked walls, the roof that leaked on rainy days. It was a precarious shelter, a temporary hiding place. They needed more. They needed a base, a way to transform the gold into something tangible and less conspicuous. Perhaps land, perhaps tools to cultivate the land more efficiently, or perhaps a way to settle in a place where they could prosper without the constant threat of envy. The idea of leaving the mountain, of venturing beyond the familiar peaks, arose in his mind. But where would they go? How would they blend into an unknown world, carrying such a heavy secret? The mountain was harsh, but it was the only home they knew. And intuition told him that the gold's destiny was intrinsically linked to these lands, to the mud castle, to the widow and her baby. He took one of the remaining gold coins, hidden in a small leather pouch beneath the floorboards. The cold, heavy gleam in his hand was a constant reminder of the promise and the danger. Elias had said he would need to travel to the city to exchange the gold. Perhaps that was the key. To find a way to the city, not to openly exchange the gold, but to understand how the outside world worked, how gold could be invested, transformed into something that wasn't just shiny metal, but security and a future. But the city was a place of strangers, of laws and curious glances. The discretion Elias offered, however expensive, was a luxury he couldn't ignore. He needed an intermediary, someone who could act on his behalf, someone who could transform the gold into something that wouldn't attract the attention of mountain predators. The night wore on, and Grandfather Ilara felt the weight of responsibility crushing him. He was not a man of business, but a man of the mountain, accustomed to fighting for daily survival. Now he was the guardian of a treasure, the link in a chain of destiny that stretched far beyond his own life. He needed more information. He needed to know how gold was used in the outside world, how it could be converted into something that guaranteed not just bread, but a future for Cale and Finn. Yes, but also for the pregnant widow and her baby, whose face he had never seen, but whose existence was as real as the gold in his hand. His next visit to Elias wouldn't just be to exchange more coins, it would be to ask questions, to probe, to understand the world beyond the mountain. Grandfather Ilara knew he was entering a dangerous game, a game where ignorance could be fatal. But he had no choice. The fate of many and the fulfillment of a mystical promise depended on his courage and cunning. The mountain still watched them. But now Grandfather Ilara was ready to watch back, to plan, to fight for a golden future he felt was within his grasp. The night in Grandfather Ilara's cabin was a heavy cloak, not of darkness, but of thoughts. As Cale and Finn slept, their small bodies huddled together, Grandfather felt the weight of the gold that was no longer in his hands, but in his destiny. The smell of fresh bread and roasted meat still lingered in the air, a bittersweet reminder of the brief joy the treasure had brought and of the immense responsibility he now carried. The mountain outside seemed to whisper secrets, each crackle of wood, each rustle of leaves, transformed into a silent warning. Elias had said the mountains had ears, and envy was a hungry predator. But Grandfather Ilara knew that the danger lay not just in the curious eyes of neighbors, but in his own ignorance. He was not a man of business, but a man of the earth, accustomed to the daily struggle for survival. Now, he was the guardian of a treasure, a link in a chain of destiny that stretched far beyond his own life. The silent voice in his heart, that mystical intuition that had guided him to the mud castle and the safe, spoke with unwavering clarity. That gold was not just for Kyle and Finn's immediate survival. It was for something greater, something that would transcend poverty and hunger. It was for the future of a baby, for the hope of a pregnant widow he had never met, but whose existence he felt with an unwavering certainty. He couldn't continue exchanging gold coins one by one with Elias. The merchant, however discreet, would eventually raise suspicions, and the risk of being robbed, or worse, would become unsustainable. He needed a plan that not only ensured his grandson's safety, but also preserved the treasure for its true purpose. It couldn't just be about buying food. It needed to be about building something that could be passed down, something that wouldn't raise red flags in the isolated mountain community. His eyes scanned the humble cabin, the cracked walls, the roof that leaked on rainy days. It was a precarious shelter, a temporary hiding place. They needed more. They needed a base, a way to transform the gold into something tangible and less conspicuous, perhaps land, perhaps tools to cultivate the land more efficiently, or perhaps a way to settle in a place where they could prosper without the constant threat of envy. The idea of leaving the mountain, of venturing beyond the familiar peaks, arose in his mind. But where would they go? How would they blend into an unknown world, carrying such a heavy secret? The mountain was harsh, but it was the only home they knew. And intuition told him that the gold's destiny was intrinsically linked to these lands, to the mud castle, to the widow and her baby. He took one of the remaining gold coins, hidden in a small leather pouch beneath the floorboards. The cold, heavy gleam in his hand was a constant reminder of the promise and the danger. Elias had said he would need to travel to the city to exchange the gold. Perhaps that was the key, to find a way to the city, not to openly exchange the gold, but to understand how the outside world worked, how gold could be invested, transformed into something that wasn't just shiny metal, but security and a future. The next day, with the sun barely rising, Grandfather Elara set off again for Elias's cabin. But this time, the anxiety was different. It wasn't the urgency of hunger, but the tension of an amateur strategist. He had rehearsed the words in his mind, seeking the most innocent way to extract information without revealing the true extent of his wealth. He needed knowledge, and Elias was his only source. Upon arrival, Elias greeted him with a shrewd smile, his eyes fixed on the coin pouch Grandfather Elara carried, lighter than last time. "Back quickly, Elara. Hunger is a demanding mistress, isn't it?" Grandfather Elara nodded, holding his gaze steady. "It's not just hunger, Elias. It's my grandson's future. I have a few other coins. Not much, but enough to think about something more lasting. I can't live on small exchanges forever." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You travel to the city, Elias. You know the world out there. How can a simple man like me, with a bit of unexpected luck, make that bit become something that lasts?" Elias narrowed his eyes, curiosity and greed dancing in his gaze. "Depends on the bit, Elara. And what you want it to become. Land, a small business. The city is a place of many opportunities, but also of many dangers for those who don't know how to move." He leaned in, his voice lower. "You have more gold, don't you? Don't give me that bit story. I know what I saw." Grandfather Elara remained calm, despite his racing heart. "Let's say I have enough to worry about the future, Elias. Not to live like a king, but to give my grandsons a chance. What does a man do with gold in the city? How does he protect it? How does he make it grow without attracting the wrong attention?" Elias smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He saw an opportunity, not just for immediate profit, but to become the sole channel for Elara's wealth. "Ah, Elara, those are questions for a businessman, not a mountain merchant, but I know some men in the city, men who know how gold can be transformed, but they charge dearly for their services and discretion. Well, discretion has an even higher price." Grandfather Elara knew he was being exploited, but information was more valuable than any coin at that moment. "I'm willing to pay, Elias, but I need to understand. I need to know what I'm doing. I can't just hand over my future and my grandsons to strangers. Elias nodded slowly, pondering. Very well, Elara. On my next trip to the city, I can ask some questions. I can bring back some information. But don't expect miracles. And don't expect it to be cheap. And remember, secrecy is your greatest wealth. And mine, if you want me to continue helping you. Tension hung in the air. Grandfather Elara had taken the second step, a step towards the unknown, a step towards a world of complexity and danger he could barely imagine. He had exchanged gold for knowledge, and the price, he knew, was yet to be revealed. The mountain watched, and the fate of the pregnant widow and her baby seemed, with each passing day, closer and more intertwined with the dangerous game Grandfather Elara was now forced to play. The dust Elias kicked up as he walked away with the coin pouch seemed to carry the weight of a new and dangerous promise. Grandfather Elara watched the merchant disappear down the winding path, feeling a chill that didn't come from the cold mountain wind, but from the uncertainty that settled in his chest. He had traded gold for knowledge, but the real price, he knew, was yet to be paid. With each step back to his cabin, the silence of the mountain seemed more oppressive, as if the trees and rocks were silent witnesses to a game he barely understood. At home, Kyle and Finn played with sticks in the packed earth, their innocent laughter a painful contrast to the darkness that deepened in Grandfather Elara's mind. They were the reason, the driving force behind every risky decision. But it wasn't just them. The silent voice in his heart, that mystical intuition that had guided him to the mud castle and the safe, spoke with unwavering clarity. That gold was not just for Kale and Finn's immediate survival. It was for something greater, something that would transcend poverty and hunger. It was for the future of a baby, for the hope of a pregnant widow he had never met, but whose existence he felt with an unwavering certainty. He was a link, a guardian, and this responsibility was a heavy burden, but also a compass. The days that followed were a slow torture. Each dawn brought the hope of seeing Elias return, and each sunset the frustration of his absence. The mountain, once a familiar refuge, now seemed like a prison. Grandfather Elara spent hours watching the path, his tired eyes scanning the horizon, imagining the dangers of the city, the traps that could swallow Elias, and, with him, the only bridge to the golden future. He tried to maintain routine, hunting, caring for his grandsons, but his mind was always far away, in the city, in Elias's hands, in the information he might bring. Anxiety was a slow poison, corroding his peace. Kyle, with the peculiar shrewdness of children, noticed the change in his grandfather. "Grandfather, are you worried?" he asked one day, his small eyes fixed on Grandfather Elara's marked face. Grandfather Elara merely smiled weakly, stroking the boy's hair. "Just thinking about the future, my little one. About how to make it bright for you." He couldn't explain the weight of the gold, the mystical promise, the danger that lurked. Their innocence was a shield he needed to protect at all costs. Lie. After what seemed like an eternity, Elias's figure appeared on the path. Grandfather Elara's heart leaped. He ran to meet him, the tension palpable in the air. Elias looked more tired, but his eyes shone with a mix of weariness and a new cunning. "Elara," Elias panted, reaching the cabin, "the city is a place of beasts, I tell you, but I brought what you asked for, and more." He threw a small leather pouch on the ground, not of coins, but of papers. "It's more complicated than I thought. Gold. It's strong currency, yes, but to turn it into something that lasts, something that doesn't scream, 'Rob me,' it takes cunning and contacts." Grandfather Elara picked up the papers, his rough hands fumbling with the parchment. They were maps, some numbers, and strange names. "What is this, Elias? What did you find out?" Elias sat down, accepting the water Grandfather Elara offered him. "I found out there are ways to invest, To buy land, yes, but not here in the mountains, not without raising suspicion. In the city there are properties, small businesses that can be bought, but the gold needs to be clean, Elara. It can't just appear out of nowhere. He paused dramatically, and there are people who can do that. Businessmen, yes, but also men, with connections. They can turn your gold into something that looks legitimate, something that can generate more wealth. But they charge a percentage, and they need proof of trust. Grandfather Elara felt a lump in his throat. Proof of trust. What does that mean? It means they don't work with small amounts, Elara. They need to see that you're serious, that you have enough for it to be worth their risk, and the risk is great, for them and for you. Elias leaned in, his voice lower, almost a whisper. There's a man, a Master Valerio. He has a reputation. He can wash your gold, as they say, turn it into capital for a business, and for land. But he demands a large part of the gold up front as a sign of good faith, and he doesn't deal with intermediaries. He wants to see the owner of the gold. Grandfather Elara felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Go to the city? He, a man of the mountain, accustomed only to the earth and silence, and hand over a large part of his treasure to a stranger? The idea was terrifying. What if I don't go? What if I don't trust him? Elias shrugged, a bitter smile on his lips. Then you keep exchanging coins with me, Elara, and with each exchange, the risk increases. With each exchange, more people start to wonder where your gold comes from. And in the city, Elara, there are people who would do anything for a handful of coins. Imagine what they would do for an entire safe. He looked at Grandfather Elara, his eyes fixed and penetrating. Master Valerio is dangerous, yes, but he is also your best chance to turn that gold into a secure future. Without him, you're just an old man with a secret too heavy to carry. The tension was almost unbearable. Grandfather Elara knew Elias was manipulating him, pushing him towards a decision. But Elias's words resonated with a dark truth. The secret was his greatest wealth, but also his greatest vulnerability. He couldn't keep hiding the gold, exchanging it in secret. He needed a permanent solution, one that guaranteed not just bread, but a future. A future for Kale and Finn, yes, but also for the pregnant widow and her baby, whose face he had never seen, but whose existence was as real as the gold in his hand. The mountain outside seemed to whisper, but now Grandfather Elara heard only the voice of his own intuition. He had to do this. He had to face the unknown, the danger. He was not a businessman, but a man of the mountain, accustomed to fighting for survival. And now he would fight for the survival of many and for the fulfillment of a mystical promise. The decision was made. He would go to the city, the mountain, once a refuge of peace and familiarity, now seemed a stage for an impending drama. The decision was made. Grandfather Elara would go to the city. Elias's voice still echoed in his ears, the words sharp as knives cutting through the fog of uncertainty. Master Valerio, a name that carried the weight of an uncertain future, but also the promise of a solution. The night that followed Elias's departure was long and sleepless. Grandfather Elara sat by the fireplace, watching the flames dance, each spark a thought, each shadow a doubt. He was a man of the mountain, his hands calloused by the earth, his eyes accustomed to the vastness of the horizon and the simplicity of life. The city. The city was a monster of stone and smoke, a labyrinth of trickery and dangers he could barely conceive. But the image of Kale and Finn, sleeping peacefully in their makeshift beds, and the silent yet powerful presence of the pregnant widow and her baby in his heart, were the driving force that propelled him. He was not doing this for himself, but for them, for a future that he felt with a mystical certainty was destined to be more than mere survival. The following days were dedicated to preparations. He couldn't just leave. There were the boys, Cale and Finn, who needed care. The only person he could trust was old Clara, an elderly neighbor who lived a little further down the path. A woman with a kind heart and steady hands. With the promise of a few coins and the assurance that his absence would be brief, she agreed to look after his grandsons. The farewell was painful. Kyle, with his childish perceptiveness, felt the gravity of the moment. "Grandfather, will you be back soon?" he asked, his eyes welling up. Grandfather Ilara hugged him tightly, feeling the weight of responsibility and love. "Faster than a blink, my little one. And when I return, we'll have stories to tell and a bright future to build." He couldn't explain the danger, the uncertainty. Their innocence was a treasure he needed to protect. The gold. That was the biggest challenge. He couldn't take the entire safe, but he needed a substantial amount to present to Master Valerio. Elias had spoken of large sums, of proof of trust. Grandfather Ilara chose a considerable portion, enough to make his heart clench with fear. How to hide it? He took an old leather backpack, worn by time and use. With patience and skill, he sewed a false bottom, reinforcing it with thick pieces of cloth and leather. The gold coins, wrapped in soft cloths to muffle their clinking, were carefully placed there, under a layer of provisions and simple clothes. The backpack looked ordinary, but its contents were extraordinary and dangerous. The mystical intuition, which had guided him to the mud castle and the treasure, now spoke with unwavering clarity. There was a greater purpose for that gold, a destiny that stretched beyond the mountains. He was a guardian, a link, and to fulfill that promise he needed to face the unknown. On the morning of his departure, the sun had barely risen, painting the sky with shades of purple and orange. The air was icy, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Grandfather Ilara looked at his cabin, at the mud castle in the distance, at the mountains that were his home. A wave of melancholy and determination washed over him. He was not an adventurer, but a simple man, forced into an extraordinary journey. Elias, as if by fate, appeared on the path. He seemed to have anticipated Grandfather Ilara's departure. His eyes, always shrewd, swept over the backpack and the old man's face. "I see you've made your decision, Ilara," Elias said, an enigmatic smile on his lips. "Wise choice. The city is a place of opportunities, but also of hungry wolves. Master Valerio, he is a man of his word, but also a man of power. Do not underestimate him." Grandfather Ilara merely nodded, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. "I will do what is necessary, Elias, for my grandson's future." Elias approached, his voice lower, almost a hiss. "Remember what I said, Ilara. Secrecy is your greatest wealth. And mine, if you want me to continue helping you. Trust no one in the city, no one. And if Valerio asks for more, do not hesitate. It's better to lose a part of the gold than to lose everything, including your life." There was a tone of genuine warning in Elias's voice, mixed with his usual cunning. He seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. Grandfather Ilara felt a chill. Elias's words were a grim reminder of the world he was about to enter. He had no illusions. The city would be a minefield. But there was no turning back. With a last look at his home, at the protective silence of the mountain, he turned and began to descend the path. Each step was a farewell to the familiar, a step towards the unknown. The backpack weighed on his back, not just with the gold, but with the weight of a promise, of a future, and of a responsibility he carried alone. The mountain watched, a silent witness to his departure, as Grandfather Ilara ventured into a world where gold was king and trust, a rare and dangerous currency. The journey had begun. The path Grandfather Ilara knew so well, every stone, every root, every bend, now seemed a road to an abyss. Each step away from the mountain was a step towards a world he could barely imagine. a world Elias had painted with colors of opportunity and danger. The thin mountain air gave way to a different smell, a mix of wood smoke, wet earth, and something more, something human and dense that he couldn't identify. As he descended, the landscape changed. The sturdy wild mountain trees were replaced by cultivated fields, small villages nestled in the valleys, and finally wider roads, beaten paths for carts and countless feet. The sun was already high when he reached the first stone houses that marked the city's periphery. It wasn't the city itself, but a cluster of buildings that seemed to stretch indefinitely. Noise began to invade his ears, the clatter of horseshoes on the cobblestones, the cries of vendors, the murmur of voices blending into a strange cacophony. His eyes, accustomed to the silent vastness of the mountain, felt overwhelmed by the sheer number of people, movement, colors, and shapes. He was a stranger, a man of the mountain, with his simple clothes and suspicious gaze, carrying a secret that could cost him his life. The backpack on his back seemed to burn, not just from the weight of the gold, but from the weight of responsibility. He mingled with the crowd, trying to appear invisible, but feeling every glance, every bump. The city was a labyrinth of narrow streets and dark alleys, where sunlight struggled to penetrate. Elias had given him a street name and a vague landmark. Near the spice market, look for an unmarked door with a symbol of scales carved into the wood. Finding Master Valerio's place was an ordeal in itself. He walked for hours, feeling his leg muscles protest, his stomach rumbling. Every corner seemed identical to the last, every face a potential threat. He asked cautiously in a low voice, sensing the distrust of the city dwellers. Finally, after many turns and dead ends, he found the spice market. The strong smell of pepper, cumin, and cinnamon was almost suffocating, and there, hidden between a fabric shop and a noisy tavern, was the door. It was made of dark, heavy wood without any sign, but with the discreet carving of scales, almost faded by time. Grandfather Elara hesitated. His heart pounded in his chest, a drum of fear and determination. He raised his hand and knocked 3 firm knocks, as Elias had instructed. The sound echoed in the silence that followed, a silence that seemed heavier than the street noise. After a moment that felt like an eternity, the door opened just a crack. A shrewd eye assessed him from head to toe. "What do you want?" a gruff voice asked. "I came to see Master Valerio. Elias sent me," Grandfather Elara replied, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. The eye disappeared, and the door opened a little wider, revealing a burly man with thick arms and an impassive expression. He gestured with his head, indicating Grandfather Elara should enter. The interior was dark and stuffy, with a smell of tobacco and old paper. The man led him down a narrow corridor, lit by oil lamps, to a wider room. There, seated behind a massive oak table, was Master Valerio. He was a middle-aged man with dark, neatly combed hair, an angular face, and eyes that seemed to see through one's soul. His clothes were fine, made of expensive fabrics, and gold rings gleamed on his fingers. He did not smile. He merely watched Grandfather Elara approach, with a disturbing calm. "So you are the man from the mountain," Valerio said, his voice soft, but with undeniable authority. "Elias spoke of you, of a secret, of an opportunity." Grandfather Elara felt a chill. Valerio knew. He knew enough to be dangerous. "I have something to offer, Master Valerio, and I need your help to turn it into a future." Valerio tilted his head slightly. "The proof of trust, yes. Elias mentioned it. It is a considerable sum, I hope. I do not work with trifles." With trembling hands, Grandfather Elara removed his backpack. He untied the knots of the false bottom, feeling the weight of the gold in his hands. Carefully, he took out the cloths that wrapped the coins and placed them on the table. The gleam of the gold, even in the dim light of the room, was unmistakable. a small pile of ancient gleaming coins, witnesses to a forgotten time. Valerio's eyes narrowed, and a slight, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. He picked up one of the coins, turning it between his fingers, testing its weight, its purity. "Interesting," he murmured. "Very interesting. Pure gold, ancient. Where it comes from, I do not ask, but the quantity. It is enough to begin." He pushed the coins back towards Grandfather Ilara, but with a gesture that indicated he wanted them back. "My fee is 20% of the total for the cleaning and initial investment. I will transform this gold into legitimate capital. I will buy properties, invest in businesses that will generate income. It will take time, and it will require more gold in installments as the investment expands. But the first step is this, and the proof of trust is the sign that you are serious." Grandfather Ilara felt a lump in his throat. 20%. It was a fortune. But Elias's words echoed, "It's better to lose a part of the gold than to lose everything, including your life." He had no choice. "I accept," Grandfather Ilara said, his voice firm, despite the fear. Valerio nodded, the smile disappearing. "Excellent. You will leave me this amount. I will give you a receipt, a document that proves our transaction. It is not a legal contract, understand. It is a promise between men. My word is my guarantee, and yours is the gold." He signaled to the burly man, who approached and took the coins from the table, carrying them into an adjacent room. Grandfather Ilara watched the gold disappear, feeling an emptiness in his stomach. He had handed over a significant portion of his treasure to a stranger in a strange city, based only on a promise. It was the riskiest gamble of his life. Valerio handed him a sealed parchment with his own crest. "This is your proof. Return in 3 moons. I will have news for you. And remember, Grandfather Ilara, silence is your greatest ally, and mine." As he left Valerio's room, Grandfather Ilara felt the street air as a relief, but also as a reminder of his vulnerability. The backpack was lighter, but the weight in his heart was immense. He had done what needed to be done. He had taken the first step towards an uncertain future, but perhaps, just perhaps, a secure future for Kyle, Finn, the pregnant widow, and the baby. The mountain, which had once seemed a refuge, now seemed a distant dream. He was alone in the city, with a piece of paper and the hope that Master Valerio was, indeed, a man of his word. The journey was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. The street air, once a relief, now seemed to carry the weight of an invisible burden. The backpack on Grandfather Ilara's back was lighter, yes, but the emptiness in his stomach was not from hunger, but from a profound uncertainty. He had handed over a part of his treasure, the hope of his grandsons, to a man whose eyes were like dark, unfathomable wells. Valerio was a man of his word. Elias had said, but what if he wasn't? What if the sealed parchment was just a worthless piece of paper, a charade to steal the gold of a naive mountain man? The city, with its incessant cacophony and strange smells, now seemed even more hostile. Every shadow, every hurried face, every whisper seemed to carry a veiled threat. He mingled with the crowd, trying to become invisible, but feeling more exposed than ever. The remaining gold, hidden in the false bottom of his backpack, seemed to burn on his back, a beacon for greedy eyes. He needed a place to stay, a safe, discreet place where he could wait for the 3 moons Valerio had stipulated. His eyes scanned the streets, looking for something that wasn't a noisy tavern or an ostentatious guest house. Finally, in a less busy alley, he spotted a worn sign that read, "Travelers Inn." It seemed simple, almost forgotten, which was exactly what he was looking for. The interior was modest, smelling of pipe smoke and stale beer. An elderly woman, with a stained apron and a tired look, attended to him. He asked for the simplest, most isolated room. paying in advance for a week with some copper coins he had saved. The woman asked no questions, simply handed him a heavy key and pointed to a narrow staircase. The room was small, with a window overlooking a dirty alley, but it had a bed and a door that could be locked. It was enough. The first few days were torture at every creak of the floorboards, every voice that echoed in the corridor. Grandfather Ilara started. He barely slept, his slumber interrupted by nightmares where Valerio laughed, showing empty hands, or where Kyle and Finn looked at him with accusing eyes. He spent hours watching the street through the curtain's crack, trying to understand the city's rhythm, the faces, the dangers. He saw pickpockets, drunken brawlers, guards patrolling with indifference. Life in the mountains, with its simplicity and honest brutality, seemed a distant paradise. To pass the time and avoid the madness of isolation, he began to take short walks. Not far, always near the inn, always with his senses sharp. He observed the markets, the artisans, the merchants. He saw wealth and poverty side by side, ostentation and misery. The city was a thousand-headed monster, each one seeking its own survival. He overheard fragmented conversations, rumors about big deals, about fortunes made and lost. And in some dark corners, he heard whispers about Master Valerio. "Valerio is a dangerous man," he heard one day, from two men playing dice in a tavern, "but fair if you have what he wants. He has his hands in everything, they say, from spices to the ships that arrive in port." These conversations, though vague, somewhat calmed his fears. Valerio was powerful, yes, but he also seemed to have a reputation for fairness within his own code. That, in some way, was a comfort. The weeks dragged on, each day an eternity. Grandfather Ilara missed the fresh mountain air, the silence, the comforting presence of his grandsons. He imagined Kale growing up, Finn learning to walk, the baby that was to come. It was for them that he was there, enduring the weight of uncertainty and fear. The gold he still carried was a constant reminder of the gamble he had made. He touched it through the fabric of his backpack, feeling the cold, heavy metal, the promise of a future or the cause of his ruin. He bought a small map of the city, studying its streets and alleys, memorizing the way to Valerio's house. He wanted to be prepared, not to be caught by surprise. He practiced what he would say, how he would carry himself. With each passing day, the tension increased, like a stretched rope about to snap. The third moon approached. Grandfather Ilara felt a mix of dread and a strange excitement. The wait was almost over. He had saved as much as possible, living on bread and water, so as not to touch the remaining gold. On the morning of the appointed day, he rose before the sun, put on his simple but clean clothes, and tied the backpack firmly to his back. Valerio's parchment was safe in his inner pocket. The journey to the spice market seemed shorter now, familiar. He recognized the streets, the smells. The dark door with the scales carving seemed to call him. His heart pounded, but this time there was a new determination mixed with the fear. He had survived the city for 3 moons. He had kept the secret. Now it was time to face Valerio again. He raised his hand, feeling the roughness of the wood. 3 firm knocks, as the first time. The sound echoed, and the silence that followed was even heavier than before. The door opened a crack and the same shrewd eye assessed him. The burly man let him in, and Grandfather Ilara found himself again in the dark corridor, the smell of tobacco and old paper filling his nostrils. Each step led him deeper into the lair of the man who held his family's future in his hands. The journey was far from over, but the next chapter was about to be written. Grandfather Ilara felt the heavy air of the corridor, a mix of aged tobacco and the dust of guarded secrets, fill his nostrils. The burly man, a silent spectre, gestured towards the door at the end of the corridor. Each step echoed not only on the floorboards, but also in his chest, a drumming of anxiety and hope. Upon entering the room, Grandfather Ilara found Valerio seated at his table. the flickering light of an oil lamp casting dancing shadows on his impassive face. The air seemed denser there, charged with an almost palpable expectation. Valerio did not smile, but his eyes, like embers beneath thick brows, fixed on Grandfather Ilara. Grandfather Ilara. Punctual. I like that. Punctuality is the sister of discipline, and discipline is the mother of fortune. His voice was a hoarse whisper, yet carried unquestionable authority. He gestured to the chair in front of the table, the same one Grandfather Ilara had sat in last time. Grandfather Ilara sat, his hands resting on his knees, trying to control the slight tremor that afflicted him. "I have come, Master Valerio, to inquire about what you promised me. The 3 moons have passed." Valerio tilted his head, a gesture that could be approval or scorn. "And your patience has been rewarded, Grandfather Ilara. The gold you entrusted to me did not lie idle. Idle gold is dead gold. Gold in motion under the right hand is gold that breathes and grows." He signaled to the burly man, who approached and placed a small, dark wooden box, carved with complex patterns, on the table. The scent of cedar emanated from it. Grandfather Ilara's heart quickened. Would he see his gold again? Or would it be an empty box confirming his worst fears? Valerio opened the box with a smooth movement. Inside, there were no ancient gold coins, but rather a stack of polished silver bars with a cold metallic gleam and a small leather-bound book, its pages filled with elegant calligraphy. "This is your initial capital, Grandfather Ilara," Valerio began, his voice now softer, almost didactic. "Transformed. The gold you gave me was used to acquire a portion of a spice shipment that arrived in port. We sold it at a considerable profit. We also invested in a strategic plot of land on the city's outskirts, which will increase in value with the approaching urban expansion. And here," he pointed to the book, "are the records of each transaction. Profits have already begun to appear." Grandfather Ilara picked up one of the silver bars. It was heavy, cold to the touch, but it wasn't gold. It wasn't his gold. He felt a pang of distrust, but Elias's words echoed. "He will transform your gold into legitimate capital." "Silver is a more versatile metal for daily trade, Grandfather Ilara," Valerio explained, as if reading his thoughts. "But make no mistake, the value is there, and the gold. The gold is in motion, generating more gold." He leafed through the book. "Your initial investment has already yielded a 10% profit after my fee. A modest sum, but it's just the beginning, proof that the system works." 10%. Grandfather Ilara felt a mix of relief and frustration. It was something, yes, but it seemed so little compared to the risk he had taken. "But as I said the first time, Grandfather Ilara, this is just the first step," Valerio continued, his eyes fixed on Grandfather Ilara's. "For this capital to truly flourish, for it to become the fortune you envision for your family, for the future of your baby, we need more. The first investment was a proof of concept. The next requires substance. Think of it as a river. The first gold was the source. Now we need tributaries for it to become a great river, capable of turning mills and irrigating fields. Without more tributaries, the source can dry up or be diverted by others." The implication was clear. Idle gold was vulnerable. Gold in his hands, in motion, was secure, and he had more gold. Valerio knew. "I need more gold, Grandfather Ilara," Valerio stated, his voice returning to a commanding tone, "to buy the remaining portion of the land, to expand the spice shipment to other ports, to invest in a newly discovered iron mine that promises great returns. Opportunities like these don't wait. The city is a place of great opportunities, but also great risks. Idle gold attracts unwanted attention. Gold in motion, under my protection, is secure gold." Grandfather Ilara felt a chill down his spine. He had more gold, hidden in his backpack, the rest of the treasure. Handing it over meant placing all his hopes in Valerio's hands. It was an all-or-nothing gamble, but the image of Cale, of Finn, of the pregnant widow and the unborn baby floated in his mind. It was for them. How much more do you need? Grandfather Elara asked, his voice almost inaudible, a thin thread of sound amidst the tension. Valerio leaned back in his chair, a slight smile. Almost a glimpse of satisfaction touched his lips. For the next stage, Grandfather Elara, to truly leverage these investments and ensure exponential returns, I need at least double what you brought me the first time. And quickly. Opportunities, as I said, do not wait. They are like ships in port. If you don't board in time, they leave without you. Double. It was almost all the gold he had left. Grandfather Elara felt the weight of the metal on his back burning through the fabric of his backpack. He had imagined Valerio would ask for more, but not so much, not so quickly. It was a blow, a final test of his faith and desperation. He looked at the silver bars, then at the ledger and finally at Valerio's eyes. There was no deception there, only a cold, calculating determination. Valerio was not a common thief. He was a master of his own game, and Grandfather Elara had entered it. I have more, Grandfather Elara admitted, his hand instinctively touching his backpack. Valerio's smile widened a little more. I knew you did, Grandfather Elara. Your determination is palpable, and that is what will make us rich. Bring it tomorrow, at noon, and then we will begin to build your grandson's empire. This is the path to true security, to the fortune that will guarantee the future you so desire. Valerio closed the wooden box and pushed it aside. Grandfather Elara understood that the audience was over. He stood, his body heavy, his mind in a turmoil. He had made his choice. He had placed his life, and his family's life, in Master Valerio's hands. As he left the room, the dark corridor seemed even more oppressive. The street air, when he finally reached it, brought no relief, but an even greater weight. He had taken the first step, and now he was about to take the second, the riskiest of all. The mountain, the mud castle, the secret safe, all seemed to recede, becoming a distant memory. He was alone in the city, with the promise of a man and the hope that this final gamble would not be his ruin, but his family's salvation. The journey was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun to deepen into the abyss of uncertainty. The street air, once a breath of relief, now seemed even heavier, laden with the weight of the newly made decision. Each of Grandfather Elara's steps resonated not only on the cobblestones, but also in his soul, an incessant drumming of uncertainty and hope. The silver box, with its cold gleam, and the ledger, with its elegant calligraphy, were tangible proofs that Valerio was not a charlatan, but also that the game was much larger and more complex than he had ever imagined. He felt the remaining gold in his backpack, a burden that burned on his back, a constant reminder of the gamble he was about to make. To double the investment, almost all that remained. The image of Cale, of Finn, of the pregnant widow, and of the unborn baby floated in his mind, a silent chorus of voices clamoring for security, for a future. It was for them that he was there. A man of the mountains, lost in the intricate web of city streets and secrets. He found refuge in a small, discreet and cheap inn in the confines of a dark alley. The room was simple, with a single oil lamp that barely managed to push back the shadows from the corners. The night promised to be long. He emptied the contents of his backpack onto the rough wooden table, the silver bars, Valerio's book, and finally the remaining gold coins. They gleamed with a dull luster in the flickering light, an ancestral treasure that now seemed so fragile, so vulnerable. Grandfather Elara picked up one of the coins, feeling its familiar weight in his palm. It was more than metal. It was the history of his family, the promise of a new beginning. But Valerio was right. Idle gold was dead gold, an easy target. Gold in motion under the right hand was gold that breathed and grew. But who was the right hand? Valerio, with his shrewd eyes and gruff voice, or destiny, which had guided Grandfather Ilara to that secret safe? He spent the night awake, his thoughts swirling in a whirlwind. He reread the ledger, trying to decipher the numbers and commercial terms Valerio had used. Spice shipment, strategic land, iron mine, words that sounded grand but also distant, abstract. He was a man who understood the earth, the cycle of seasons, hard and honest work. This new world, with its invisible transactions and promises of exponential profits, was an abyss. With each passing hour, anxiety deepened, but also a strange resignation. He had crossed a threshold. There was no turning back to the simplicity of the mountains. His family's life was now intrinsically linked to the fate of that gold, and to the man who promised to transform it into fortune. The decision, however terrifying, had already been made. It was an all-or-nothing gamble. Dawn arrived, not with the softness he knew in the mountains, but with a cold, merciless light that invaded the small window. He rose, his body heavy, but his mind strangely clear. There was a task to be done. He carefully wrapped the remaining gold in a cloth, placing it back in his backpack, feeling its weight on his back like a mantle of responsibility. The journey back to the spice market seemed shorter, but each step was laden with palpable tension. The streets, once labyrinthine, now seemed an inevitable path. The smell of spices, fresh bread, and charcoal smoke mingled with the odor of his own fear. The dark door, with the scales carving, awaited him like a portal to an uncertain future. 3 firm knocks, the sound echoed in the morning silence. The same shrewd eye assessed him. The same burly man let him in. The dark corridor, with its smell of tobacco and old paper, seemed even more oppressive. Each step led him deeper into Valerio's lair, into the heart of the city that now held his family's destiny. Upon entering the room, Valerio was already seated at the table, the oil lamp casting dancing shadows. He did not smile, but his eyes, like embers, fixed on Grandfather Ilara. Grandfather Ilara, punctual as I expected. Punctuality, as I said, is the sister of discipline. His voice was a hoarse whisper, yet carried unquestionable authority. Grandfather Ilara placed his backpack on the table, the muffled sound of the gold inside seeming like a whisper of his own destiny. He untied the clasp, opened the cloth, and let the gold coins spill onto the dark wood. They gleamed, a silent testament to his faith and desperation. Valerio tilted his head. A slight, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. His eyes scanned the coins, a gleam of satisfaction in them. He did not touch them immediately, merely observed them, like a predator assessing its prey. Excellent, Grandfather Ilara. Excellent. You have made the right choice. True fortune is not just found, it is cultivated, watered with courage and trust. He picked up a few coins, weighing them in his palm, feeling the ancient texture. Then, with a precise gesture, he pushed them aside and pulled out a new ledger, thicker and more richly bound than the previous one. With this, Grandfather Ilara, we can move mountains, or, in this case, build an empire. You are no longer a small investor, you are a partner. The word partner resonated in Grandfather Ilara's mind, strange and powerful. Valerio leafed through the new book. The land on the outskirts of the city will be yours. A part, of course, but a substantial part. The iron mine, a considerable slice of the profits, and the spice shipments, now beyond the ports of this city, to distant lands, to markets you cannot even imagine. He pushed a small leather pouch towards Grandfather Ilara. It was heavy, and upon opening it, Grandfather Ilara saw a handful of silver coins and a few small gold ones. "This is for you, for your expenses, for your stay, an advance on future profits. We don't want our partner living on bread and water." Was it a gesture of good faith, or a hook to ensnare him further? Grandfather Ilara felt a mix of relief and a new layer of anxiety. He had handed over his treasure, but now he seemed to have handed over something more, his own freedom. "Now, Grandfather Ilara, the true journey begins," Valerio continued, his eyes fixed on Grandfather Ilara's. "You can no longer return to the mountains and wait. Gold in motion requires a watchful eye. You need to learn,